I was fixing the hinges on the barn door when I heard the low grind of diesel engines rolling up my gravel drive. I wiped my hands on my jeans and squinted into the sun. 3 bulldozers. Not 1. 3. Behind them stood a smug woman in a pencil skirt and oversized sunglasses, her arms crossed like she'd just conquered Rome. Of course, it was Cheryl. Cheryl Whitmore, president of the Hidden Pines Homeowners Association, a woman who looked like she drank HOA bylaws for breakfast and power-tripped off parking violations. She was flanked by 2 board members, both nodding like bobbleheads. "This is private property," I called out, stepping forward. Cheryl didn't even flinch. "Victor Sandley, you were given notice. This land is subject to HOA jurisdiction and is being cleared for non-compliance." I laughed. "You've lost your damn mind, Cheryl. This is a working farm. I've had this property for 15 years. Your HOA paperwork didn't exist until 2 years ago." She pulled out a stack of papers, waved them like holy scripture. "According to Article 12, Section 3, Subdivision D, I don't care what subsection you pulled out of your binder." I cut in. "This land was never part of Hidden Pines. Not then, not now." She smiled tight, plastic. "That's where you're wrong. The board voted last month to annex your parcel. It passed. You can't vote to steal someone's land," I said, stepping between her and the machines. "This isn't Monopoly." She snapped her fingers. The lead bulldozer roared to life, and the driver, some poor guy who clearly didn't know what he'd signed up for, started crawling toward my barn. I didn't move. I just glanced at the farmhouse. Cheryl followed my gaze. Standing on the porch were my 2 brothers, both in suits. One held a manila folder, the other had his phone up, already recording. "Cheryl," I said, "meet Miles and Grant. They're attorneys. Real ones. Not the kind that get their legal advice from HOA Facebook groups." Cheryl's smile twitched. "Grant filed an injunction against any unauthorized development on this land 2 days ago," I added. "It's posted on the front gate. You missed it. Maybe because you were too busy measuring grass blades and counting mailbox heights." The bulldozer stopped. Miles stepped down the porch stairs, cool as ever. "And if those machines so much as scrape a fence post, Cheryl, you'll be paying for damages, trespassing, and violating a court order." One of the board members leaned in and whispered something to Cheryl. Her face turned red. Not embarrassed red, angry red. The kind that comes before a full Karen eruption. "I will not be intimidated," she snapped. "This land is a hazard to the neighborhood." "It's a farm," I said. "You moved in next to it. What did you expect, yoga goats and lavender lattes?" She turned and stormed off toward her car. "This isn't over, Victor." I looked at Grant. He just raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it's only just getting started." The next morning, I woke up to find a city code inspector poking around the north fence line. He had a clipboard and a camera, and he was taking pictures of my irrigation trench like it was the scene of a crime. I walked out with a thermos of coffee in one hand and didn't say a word until he noticed me. He jumped a little. "Oh, morning. You Victor Sandley?" "Depends who's asking," I said, offering him the thermos. He didn't take it. "David Renner. City Infrastructure Enforcement." He tapped the ID clip to his vest. "I received a report that this property may be diverting stormwater runoff into protected wetlands." I blinked. "You're kidding." He shook his head, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's a serious claim. Comes with fines if proven." "All right," I said slowly. "Who filed the report?" He hesitated, then flipped his clipboard around. "Came through the Hidden Pines HOA. Signed by A. Cheryl Whitmore." I let out a breath through my nose. "Of course it was. I have to investigate anyway," he added quickly. "It's protocol." "You're welcome to," I said, gesturing toward the trench. "But that runoff setup was inspected when I installed it. 5 years ago. I've got the signed permit in my filing cabinet and the engineer's report. County approved." David's eyebrows lifted. "That would make this a false complaint." "Which is a civil violation," I said, "if it's made knowingly." He gave a tight nod. "I'll file my findings. If you can provide the documents this afternoon, I'll close the case." I turned and called toward the porch. "Grant, Bring the folder labeled water stuff? David blinked. You keep your permits labeled water stuff? Helps me sleep at night. By lunchtime, David had packed up and left, muttering something about his time being wasted. I watched him drive off before heading into the barn, where Miles was on his laptop, scrolling through property records. Did you know the HOA amended their charter last month? He asked, not looking up. No, but I'm guessing you did. They added a clause giving themselves emergency jurisdiction over adjacent properties during situations deemed hazardous to the community. Then they backdated it 6 weeks. I leaned against the workbench. That legal? Not even close. I nodded toward his screen. What exactly are we looking at? Fraud, he said. And possibly conspiracy. They filed the amendment with forged timestamps and claimed it was reviewed by a lawyer. A lawyer who, according to the Bar Association, lost his license in 2009. I blinked. So they're using a dead lawyer to justify seizing land? Disbarred. Not dead. But the effect's the same. I rubbed my jaw, feeling the weight of it all. What's the play, then? They trying to develop this land? Miles clicked a few more times, then turned the screen to me. An email thread between Cheryl and a development firm called Larchmont Ventures. The subject line read, Phase 2 Expansion Timeline Proposal. Cheryl was negotiating to sell access rights to this land before they even sent that bulldozer, Miles said. They're planning a luxury condo complex. And your farm? It's the access road. I stared at the screen, the bile rising in my throat. So the whole non-compliance stunt was just a cover to get the machinery in. Exactly. Can we stop them? Grant walked in, holding a thick envelope. Already in motion. I just filed an emergency injunction in district court. But I want them charged. For what? Forgery. Attempted fraud. Possibly criminal trespass if we can prove she manipulated the board. I looked between them. You think we can bring the whole thing down? If we go public, Miles said, we'll need more than paperwork. We need testimony. That's when I had an idea. I'll call Tom. Tom, the beekeeper? Grant frowned. Tom, the Vietnam vet with 2 acres and a grudge against the HOA. I said. He's been collecting stories for years. He's got a binder full of complaints the board never responded to. That evening, I drove over to Tom's place. His yard looked like a jungle with disciplined rows of blueberries, tangled vines, and half-sculpted driftwood projects stacked under the eaves. He came out with a mug of dandelion tea and a wary look. I heard about the bulldozers, he said before I even parked. They're trying to annex my farm, I told him. We're building a case, but we need evidence of a pattern. You still have that binder? He led me into his garage, where he pulled a dusty plastic crate off a shelf. Inside were years of paperwork. Letters, denied variance requests, ignored petitions. All of it stamped with the HOA's seal. They've been targeting anyone who doesn't fit the image, he said. People with vegetable gardens, solar panels, chickens. Cheryl wants the neighborhood to look like a catalog cover. I took the crate and shook his hand. You might have just saved a lot more than my farm. When I got back, Miles and Grant were in the dining room, piecing everything together. Miles had the emails printed and laid out like a crime board. Grant was on the phone with the state attorney's office. By midnight, we had close to 20 affidavits from other residents. People who'd been fined for imaginary infractions, whose appeals had been lost, whose homes had been photographed without consent. It wasn't just abuse of power, it was systemic manipulation. The next morning, we called a town hall meeting. We reserved the community center and sent out flyers. Word spread fast. By the time we got there, cars were parked down both sides of the street. People were already murmuring as we walked in with a box of evidence and a folder full of legal documents. Cheryl showed up halfway through wearing a blazer and a look of disdain. When she saw the crowd, her steps slowed. I took the mic. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Victor Sandley. Yesterday, the HOA attempted to demolish part of my property under the claim that it had been annexed. That claim was false. What we've uncovered since then affects every person in this room. I gestured to the table where Grant laid out the documents, altered charters, fake legal sign-offs, development contracts. Miles stepped forward. This isn't just an internal dispute. These documents have been sent to the county prosecutor. We have evidence of forged filings, fraudulent votes, and coordinated attempts to seize private land, all under the banner of HOA authority. The room exploded in murmurs. Cheryl stepped forward, waving her hands. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," she said. "These men are twisting information. None of this has been verified by the board." "You mean the board you control?" said a voice from the back. Tom stepped out of the crowd, holding up one of his letters. "You ignored this for 5 years. I've got 17 more just like it." A woman near the front stood. "You fined me for having curtains that were too bold in my bedroom." Another man raised his hand. "You threatened to sue me for putting up a flagpole." The crowd was turning. Cheryl started backing toward the exit. Grant raised his voice. "There will be a vote next week to dissolve the current HOA board pending the investigation. Until then, all enforcement actions are suspended by court order." Someone cheered, then another. The room erupted. I walked outside, the night air cool on my face. My farm was still standing. The bulldozers were gone. And Cheryl? She just lost control of the very people she thought she could intimidate. But we weren't done. Not by a long shot. 2 days after the town hall, the sheriff's department rolled up in unmarked vehicles and walked straight into the Hidden Pines HOA office with a search warrant. They didn't knock. Miles and Grant had compiled a digital dossier so airtight the county prosecutor filed criminal charges before Cheryl even had time to delete her email cache. We had everything: signatures from forged meeting minutes, recorded calls with the development firm, and even bank statements showing unreported consulting fees paid to Cheryl and 2 board members. But what really tipped the scales was the discovery tucked inside a red accordion folder labeled Community Beautification Budget. Inside were receipts for luxury spa treatments, catered dinners, and a flight to Aspen, all paid out of HOA funds. That folder didn't come from us. It came from Leo Vance, the HOA treasurer. He showed up at my front porch at sunrise wearing sweatpants and carrying the folder like it burned his hands. Said he'd had enough and wanted to come clean before the whole thing swallowed him too. I thought it was just perks, he said, his voice rough, until I saw the checks written to Larchmont Ventures. That's when I knew something was off. Grant took the folder without a word and handed it straight to the sheriff's deputy the same morning. By the time the board realized Leo had flipped, it was too late. The sheriff's team seized every file cabinet and hard drive in the HOA office. Cheryl was escorted out wearing sunglasses and a coat over her head like a third-rate celebrity ducking the press. The 2 board members who followed her out didn't speak. They didn't have to. That evening, the local news ran the story at the top of the hour. Footage from the town hall played behind the anchor while a reporter stood in front of Cheryl's house, which now had security cameras trained on every angle and a handwritten note taped to the door that read "No comment." But the real twist didn't come until the next week, when the county assessor's office reached out. They'd reviewed the HOA's annexation claim and uncovered something bigger. Hidden Pines had been illegally collecting dues from 12 properties that were never legally included in the association's boundaries. For years, thousands of dollars in unauthorized fees had been taken under false pretenses, and Cheryl had signed off on every statement. Miles sat on the porch steps that afternoon, flipping through a spreadsheet the assessor's office had emailed him. They were pocketing nearly $30,000 a year off properties they didn't even own the rights to, he said, tapping the screen. And they threatened liens on people who refused to pay. I leaned against the post. That's straight-up racketeering. Which is why the state attorney's office is involved now, Grant said, walking out with 2 mugs of coffee. They're taking over the case. The civil suit was already underway, but once the fraud crossed into criminal territory, the charges piled up: fast wire fraud, forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, and a special count for misuse of community funds. Cheryl's lawyer tried to argue that she had been misled by the board, that she didn't understand the legal boundaries, that the development firm had miscommunicated their intentions. But the emails told another story. In one, she'd written, "Once we get Sandley's land, we can fast-track the access road and offer naming rights to the highest bidder. HOA approval is a formality." That line alone made it into the indictment. Despite the chaos, life on the farm didn't slow down. I still had to repair the barn wall that the bulldozer had scraped when it lurched forward that day. The goats still needed feeding, the irrigation system needed adjusting after the heavy rain, and the tractor threw a belt halfway through the eastern field. But every time I passed the mailbox, I noticed something small, a wave from someone I hadn't talked to before, or a thank you note from a neighbor who'd quietly endured years of HOA harassment and was finally able to install the rain barrel they'd been fined for twice. One morning, I found a pie on the porch. No note, just peach scrawled in ballpoint on the foil. I brought it inside and set it on the counter. Miles raised an eyebrow. "You make new enemies or new friends?" "Hard to tell these days," I said. The community wasn't just recovering, it was waking up. People were organizing, holding informal meetings, discussing replacing the HOA with a voluntary neighborhood council. No dues, no fines, just basic communication and coordination for shared spaces. Tom, of course, volunteered to chair it. "I've been waiting for years to use a whiteboard again," he told me, proudly hauling a 6-foot one out of his garage. The development firm, Larchmont Ventures, tried to distance themselves from Cheryl the moment the subpoenas hit. Their spokesperson claimed they had no knowledge of the annexation scheme. But when the city council learned that Larchmont had been quietly lobbying for zoning changes based on the illegal expansion, their permits were pulled. The site plan for the condo complex was officially rejected, and the city issued a statement clarifying that the farm would remain zoned agricultural for the foreseeable future. Cheryl, meanwhile, was officially removed from the HOA board. Her house went up for sale within a month, and the listing sat untouched for weeks. Word had gotten around. One afternoon not long after, I was in the workshop sanding down a cedar board when Grant walked in holding a yellow envelope. "This just came from the courthouse," he said. "You'll want to see it." Inside was a letter from the judge. The civil suit had been resolved. Cheryl and the other 2 board members were personally liable for the attempted annexation, and restitution was awarded to the affected homeowners, including full repayment of every dollar improperly taken through fake assessments and illegal dues. My portion? Enough to replace every damaged fence post, upgrade the irrigation system, and finally build that new greenhouse I'd been putting off for 3 years. I sat down on the workbench, the letter in my hand. "Never thought I'd see Cheryl pay for a tomato trellis," I said. Miles grinned. "Justice grows where it's watered." Grant rolled his eyes. "Please never say that in a courtroom." The following weekend, we held a picnic on the edge of the field. Nothing fancy. Grilled burgers, folding chairs, and a table made from 2 sawhorses and a barn door. Neighbors brought dishes, kids ran around barefoot, and someone strung up fairy lights between the trees. People talked freely. They laughed. They asked questions instead of whispering behind closed blinds. At one point, an older couple approached me. They introduced themselves as the Parkers. Lived 3 doors down from Hidden Pines Gate. Said they'd been fined twice in the last year for unauthorized trellis dimensions. The woman handed me a small envelope. "We took our trellis down," she said quietly, "but we never cashed the check from the HOA refund. Figured it could help with your greenhouse." I tried to refuse. They insisted. "It's not about the money," the man said. "It's about standing up to people who think rules are weapons." By sunset, the fire pit was going, and someone brought out a guitar. I sat back with a paper plate of peach pie and watched the smoke twist into the sky. We hadn't just defended a patch of land. We'd pulled the roots out of something rotten and ugly, and in its place, something better had started to grow. 2 weeks after the community picnic, I was in the greenhouse assembling the last row of vertical planters when Grant called me from the county courthouse. "They just unsealed the financial audit," he said. "You're going to want to sit down." I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the bench. "Go on." He paused, then dropped it. Cheryl was laundering money. Through the HOA. I didn't answer right away. "She set up a shell landscaping company," he continued. "Filed under a fake name. The HOA contracted it for grounds maintenance, $27,000 a year. Every year since she took over. Was it ever real? I asked. Not even a website, said Grant. The checks were cashed into a P.O. box account registered under a pseudonym, the same one used during the Larchmont negotiations. I let out a slow breath. That explains the sudden SUV. And the remodeled kitchen. The state's filing wire fraud, money laundering, and misappropriation of community funds. Grand jury's already reviewing it. Miles picked up on the third ring when I tried him next. Yeah, he said without greeting, and we found where the money went. She bought land. Not around here, in a different county. Under a trust. She was planning to build a private vacation rental using HOA money. Let me guess, I said. She used another fake name? She used her dog's name. I'm not kidding. It got worse. Turns out Cheryl had pressured the HOA's previous president into resigning by threatening to report his son for zoning violations she'd fabricated using photos taken through his backyard fence. The man, Robert Kinley, came forward once he saw the news coverage. He brought a notarized resignation letter Cheryl had drafted ahead of time. Miles presented it to the state attorney's office the next morning. They folded it into the larger investigation, which now included witness intimidation, falsification of public documents, and criminal conspiracy. By the end of the week, Cheryl was arrested at a golf course 2 towns over, still wearing her cleats. When the deputies pulled her aside, she asked for a moment to finish her round. They didn't give it to her. The mugshot made the evening broadcast. At her arraignment, she pled not guilty. Her attorney, a stiff, corporate man with a voice like dry toast, argued she'd simply misunderstood administrative boundaries and acted in good faith. The judge wasn't impressed. Bail was denied. She was a flight risk. Too many fake names. Too many accounts. The remaining HOA board members scrambled. With Cheryl gone and 2 others under active investigation, only one remained, a quiet man named Jeremy who hadn't spoken at a single meeting in over a year. He showed up at my place the next day, hat in hand. I know I didn't do anything to stop her, he said. But I didn't sign any of those contracts. I didn't take any money. I looked him over. He was nervous but not evasive. What do you want? To dissolve the HOA, he said. Permanently. The residents already voted to suspend operations. I want to finalize it. You need a majority, I said. I have it, he replied. We collected signatures. 83% want it gone. He handed me a folder. Inside were notarized statements from homeowners, all demanding immediate disbandment. Why bring this to me? I asked. Because you fought back, he said. And because people trust you now. The paperwork was filed the next morning. The county clerk reviewed it, verified the signatures, and posted the notice on the public record. Hidden Pines Homeowners Association ceased to exist at 9:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. The community wasted no time. People removed the outdated signage from the entrance. The rigid, ornamental gate that Cheryl had installed at HOA expense was dismantled with power tools by a couple of retired mechanics. Someone repainted the mailbox kiosk with bright colors and handprints, and a little boy from down the road posted a sign next to it that read, "Everyone's welcome." I found Tom in the old meeting hall 2 days later, setting up folding chairs. Neighborhood council's meeting tonight, he said. Nothing formal. Just folks talking. He held up a list. First order of business, free compost bins. I laughed. You're going to turn this place into a co-op, aren't you? He gave me a look. Try and stop me. The Larchmont development project was officially canceled by the City Planning Commission. Without the annexed land for access and with the public backlash too hot to handle, the firm withdrew their proposal entirely. Their rep issued a statement claiming a commitment to transparency and community well-being. No one bought it. I received a letter from the county a few days later. It contained a formal apology for the unannounced inspection and a signed confirmation that my property had always been outside the HOA's jurisdiction. They also sent me the name of the city employee who'd greenlit the bulldozer permits without verifying the land boundaries. She'd been quietly terminated after the internal review. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just a letter with a stamp and a name crossed off a department roster. One afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small metal sign with engraved letters. Sandley Farm EST 2008 respected. Not regulated, there was no note. Just a post-it with a smiley face drawn in blue ink. I mounted it on the front gate. Fall came early that year. The air turned crisp and the fields buzzed with life. The greenhouse was producing more than I could sell, so I started giving away baskets of lettuce and tomatoes at the new community board's weekly gatherings. At one of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Delaney told me she'd planted a garden for the first time in 10 years. I stopped after Cheryl fined me for using a plastic trellis, she said. Said it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. She smiled as she handed me a basket of cucumbers. Now I've got 3 of them. Bright orange. I didn't need to say anything. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned gold over the fields, I stood by the fence and watched kids chase each other through the tall grass. Someone was playing music from a portable speaker, and the scent of grilled corn drifted through the air. The place felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Miles and Grant joined me by the fence. You think she'll take a plea deal? I asked. Only shot she has, said Miles. The evidence is stacked higher than her mortgage. She'll fold. Restitution? I asked. Already in progress, said Grant. They've frozen her accounts. The state's auctioning the land she bought under the trust. Proceeds go to the victims' fund. So it's over? Miles looked at the field. The fight is. Grant added. But what you all built out here? That's just getting started. We stood in silence for a while, watching the wind move through the corn. No more fake citations. No more bulldozers. No more board meetings held in secret. Just neighbors. And a field. And the sound of laughter cutting through the dusk. Exactly the way it was supposed to be.